Welcome to the Pod of Inquiry, pushing the envelope for human understanding and optimization, the podcast for podiatrists. The Pod of Inquiry is designed to empower you with knowledge. What happens from there is up to you. Your host, Dr. Stephen Barrett, has designed this show to take you down some very deep rabbit holes, hopefully bringing you back out again, relatively unscathed, but cerebrally whipped, enabling a better understanding of all things worthy of inquiry. If you have more questions after the show, then that is good. The new discovery today many times was the new discovery 50 years ago, only to be suppressed or plainly ignored. Medicine and surgery can sometimes take a long while to get their paradigm shifted. We hope to have a lot of fun on this show and maybe destroy some ridiculous dogma along the journey. Thanks for joining the show today. Let's start spelunking.
My guest today is Dr. Frank Shallenberger. Dr. Shallenberger is the president of the American Academy of Ozone Therapy. Dr. Shallenberger is truly one of the world's experts, if not the world expert in ozone therapy, and it has been a pleasure and an honor for me to be able to interact with him over the last couple of years. I first met Dr. Shallenberger by taking his ozone course in Reno, Nevada, and then actually went out to Carson City to spend some time with him, where I was tested metabolically and was able to round on some patients with him. I think you'll find this episode extremely informative and will put you in the right direction if you have any interest in integrating ozone therapy into your practice. We discuss many things, and one of the things that we focus on is metabolism, and I think Dr. Shallenberger provides a very insightful perspective on metabolism, and that ozone is not a panacea, but it is a tool to be interwoven into the overall treatment of the patient. I hope you enjoy this episode as much as I enjoyed getting to spend some more time with this wonderful gentleman, Dr. Frank Shallenberger. Okay, I'm here today with Dr. Frank Shallenberger. Dr. Shallenberger is really world known for his therapies in ozone. I had the pleasure of not only getting to attend one of his ozone conferences about a year or so ago in Reno, Nevada, but also have visited Dr. Shallenberger myself for metabolic testing. And I think I've probably sent you 4 or 5 patients over the last year, some of the toughest of the tough, and I appreciate you looking at them and taking care of them. So thanks for taking time. I know you're up in Montana, and for you to carve out this section of time for us is really appreciated. So with that, let's talk about metabolism and ozone.
Well, it's good to be here with you, Stephen.
So let me ask you, can you tell the audience about how you got to this place? Because I think it's a fascinating journey.
Well, okay. I mean, that could take a long time to really describe it, but I guess the short answer is, like most docs, I went to medical school and was trained in the more or less conventional ways of doing things. I got out of medical school, got out of my training programs, and I started to realize, this is really limited, and I saw the limitations. And I went to my chief of staff. At this point, I'm just a young guy. This is the early 70s. I'm just a young guy. And I go to my chief of staff, Stephen, and I tell him, hey, I don't understand this. My patients aren't getting any better. And in fact, too much of the time, it's aggravating to me, but too much of the time I'm giving them these medications and they get sick from the medications. And I said, now, wait a second. I just graduated from a 4-year training. I just graduated from 4 years of medical school. I don't realize how I could be this off, how I could be doing things this poorly. So I went and I talked to the chief of staff, and so we had a number of conversations. And after the sum total of those conversations was, Frank, you're doing just fine. You're doing what we all do. And I said, well, are you guys willing to accept the fact that your patients never get better or rarely get better? And half the time they get sick from the things you're doing to them? And he said, yeah, that's sort of the best we can do. We're not really here to cure disease so much We're here to, alleviate symptoms and make lives better. And I thought to myself, that's just limited. That's not why I got into this bag. I got into this thing so that actually make people better, cure them of their problem. That's what was the idea that was in my head. So it was a rude awakening for me. So at that point, I said, I got to look around. I've got to start to investigate something. And what was interesting at that time, Stephen, is my dad, who's a doctor, and Dad came up and he graduated from medical school in the late 30s. And he had all these books, these old books. And he called me up around this time and he said, Frank, I got all these old books. I wonder if you want them. I said, yeah, sure, I'll take them. Sure. So I got all these old books. I'm reading these books printed in the 20s and the 30s. And they're talking about, vitamins and minerals and nutrition. And I got this one book from SIBA, the pharmacy company, the pharma company. And in there, we open up the first page. It says thiamine deficiency. And it says, nervousness, anxiety, insomnia, pain, aches. And I'm thinking, fatigue. Those are my people. That's who I see all day long. You're talking about thiamine deficiency? Anyhow, all of this opened my eyes and started me on a journey back in the late 70s to learn what they didn't teach me in medical school.
So then, after you had made that transformation from the one disease, one drug paradigm, and actually saw that you had to get these patients metabolically in shape or in tune in order to really, manifest the best health, that's when you came across Ozone in the early 80s?
Yes, so that's true. So in my quest, I was constantly trying to read things, books, go to conferences, do everything I could to kind of learn things they didn't teach in medical school. And I came across this course in Germany taught by Renata Wiebahn, who was a 5-day course and was on the use of ozone in medicine. I didn't know much about ozone at that point. I had to go look it up. Found out that it was an oxygen molecule and it was a very strong oxidant. And at that point in time, everybody was saying, well, oxidants are what cause disease. And I'm thinking, how can these guys be given oxidants to treat disease when oxidants are supposed to cause disease? So that's when I said, I got to figure out what's going on here because something's not right. So I went over there, did the 5-day course, came home, and was absolutely convinced with what they showed me because I didn't realize it at the time. But ozone therapy is not a new kid on the block. It's been around since the 1800s. And at that point in time, there are hundreds of articles already scientifically written about ozone and books and all kinds of stuff. Now we have over 3,000. But I was enamored by it. I got home and I started using ozone therapy on people, and people started getting better that never would have gotten better without that. And that's how I got into this.
It's really interesting. I first was introduced to ozone by one of our mutual friends, Nathan Bryan, who actually did episode 3 for us. So if you're listening to this, you want to go back and hear some stuff about nitric oxide, Nathan's the one to do that. But Nathan introduced that to me when I was actually down at his ranch in Central Texas. And I was astounded that, there was so much work in this arena, because when you mention ozone to one of your colleagues here in the US, they look at you with a blank stare going, well, I heard that's dangerous. It's really, bad. And then when I talk to my colleagues, I do a lot of work with some great guys over in Spain. And then they look at when I, mention ozone, it's like, oh yeah, we've been doing that for decades. So why are you excited about it now? I think it's kind of interesting that, there's this perception that, I guess, you hear the term misinformation a lot. I think there's probably a lot of misinformation about ozone therapy. And hopefully by the end of this episode, that misinformation will be dispelled.
Yeah. When I first got into it, I went to the libraries. There's no internet back then. So I had to go to the libraries and look up ozone therapy and such. And every single article at that point in time was about the toxicity of ozone. Every single one. There wasn't anything that talked about the benefits of it. It is toxic when taken into the lungs. That's the only place you can't administer ozone. You can't put it in the lungs. Lung tissue can't handle it. All the other tissues in the body are greatly served by it. But the lungs are very toxic to the lungs. So all the articles are written about the toxicity of it, but they don't tell you, oh, by the way, it's only toxic in the lungs. It's not toxic in other places. But people, from all that stuff, just sort of naturally think, oh, yeah, it must be a very toxic stuff.
Yeah. And I think that, I don't want to get into the conspiracy theory too much, but I mean, it's relatively inexpensive to get set up with this. And, there's not it's not a patented big pharma item. So, there may be some pushback from that arena, to continue proffering some of this where it's dangerous and all. I mean, if you think about it, every drug is dangerous, and you have to, you have to know the dosage of the drug. And I think you point that out even in your great little book, The Ozone Miracle, I believe it was titled. And it's like every drug has an indication and a proper dosage. And I think the same is said with ozone. The other thing I love too is that in that book, you pointed out that this is a tool. It's not a panacea, and it's not this is going to take care of everything type of thing. I wish we could find that, because it would make our jobs a lot easier, especially with the patients that just want the magic pill, right? It's like, I don't want to do the work. I just want you to give me this magic pill that will make me better. And so I think part of the success with the ozone, as with anything, is proper patient selection and, indication.
Good point. Super good points. Yeah. It's like I tell all the docs that come to my seminars, ozone's not going to be the panacea that some tout it to be, but when you use ozone along with all the other things that you do, you're just going to be better. You're just going to get better results, whether you're a cardiologist or an orthopedist or whatever it is. You add ozone into what you're already doing. Don't change what you're doing necessarily. It doesn't necessarily replace what you're doing. It just enhances it. It's a really good point.
Well, and I think the other point you made in your book, which is excellent, is that you can precondition people. So if somebody is going to go in for, some chemotherapy, or if someone is going to go in for a surgical procedure, by getting them, optimally maximized before that event, that's just empirical and makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, oncology, actually, you brought that up. That's a really good example of this, because ozone is not going to cure cancer.
Right.
But if you're getting conventional oncology treatment and you're having ozone along with it, one, the results are going to be better. You're going to get a better cancer killing effect. And two, the side effects are going to be less. Better results, fewer side effects, same old treatment, just adding ozone in.
Right. And so I guess that brings us, let's talk a little bit about the physiology of ozone. I mean, there's so many different ways to administer it. And, I've been fortunate with, some different types of administration, but let's talk about routes of administration and physiology. What is ozone doing? Because it does something different topically than it does once you do a infusion with it. So you want to share some of your insight on that?
Well, for the listeners, what ozone, you have to understand what ozone is. It's a molecule, and it's a molecule that's purely made of oxygen. There's nothing else in there. There's no nitrogen, no carbon, no anything else. It's just a pure oxygen molecule. It consists of 3 atoms of oxygen, as opposed to conventional oxygen, which consists of 2 atoms. So ozone has 3 atoms of oxygen. The oxygen that you're going to get in the hospital or on the ambulance is going to have 2 atoms of oxygen. And that makes it a world of difference. That 3rd atom of oxygen that's present in ozone makes it extremely reactive. It's very reactive compared to standard oxygen, which is relatively inert compared to ozone. So when you take ozone and you put it into a tissue, and literally we can talk more about this, but you can put it any place you want. except for the lungs. When you put it into a tissue, it instantaneously reacts with the fatty acids in that tissue to produce what we call ozonides. Ozonides are peroxidized lipids. There's thousands of different versions of them, but they all share the same commonality. They're peroxidized lipids. These peroxidized lipids then that you just formed by injecting ozone into the body. By the way, I inject ozone into the body and the ozone in a second is gone.
Right.
It's no longer there. What
Right.
it did is it reacted and formed these peroxides. These peroxides then can stay in the tissues for, certainly days up to weeks. And then the peroxides are what stimulate all kinds of activity at a cellular and at an organ level, stimulate the body to do things. It's not like a drug in the sense that you give a drug, it has its own direct action. It does something.
Right.
Ozone's not like that. It makes these peroxides, and these peroxides stimulate the body to do what it already does. It just stimulates it to do it better.
Right. So if you're looking at it from a topical administration, like limb bagging or something like that, then you're looking at the virucidal, bactericidal effects of this molecule. But as you point out, as soon as it comes in contact with the tissue, it's no longer ozone. So you get these peroxidases. And then explain how it modulates very positively the immune system, because you've talked in your lectures about what it does to the different interleukins. And I think that's an important premise for people to understand.
Yeah, so we could start this way, and I could just tell people that there's no viral illness I've come across that can't be beat with ozone therapy. And I've treated every virus you can imagine, even the more recent viruses, from hantavirus to West Nile virus. I've treated bird flu. I've treated influenza A, influenza B, meningococcal meningitis virus. I've treated all kinds of viruses, herpes, shingles, all these viruses, measles, whatever. It doesn't matter. Ozone knocks them out. Now, you got to ask yourself, how is that possible? How can ozone knock out every single virus there is? And the reason is because it's not knocking out viruses. It's stimulating the immune system to do what it was supposed to do in the first place. Because ideally, when you and I get exposed to a virus, ideally, our immune system is supposed to control it and knock it out, and it doesn't ever bother us. And we know that happens. Lots of people get exposed to viruses and they don't get sick. That's because their immune system did what it was supposed to do. But when we get exposed to a virus and we get sick, that means our immune system is not behaving like it's supposed to. And what ozone does is it stimulates the immune system to be stronger, to operate more effectively.
So it's also bioenergetic, is it not, from a mitochondrial standpoint as well? So we have upregulation of the immune system. And I guess we would say that we can upregulate mitochondria with it, right?
Absolutely. Yeah. And we get in the seminar, of course, we get into a lot of biochemical and physiological science to explain this phenomenon. But the phenomenon has to do with the fact that when all that oxygen that we take in, and listeners are going to certainly understand that of everything that the human body takes in, there's nothing anywhere close to the importance that oxygen is. You got to have oxygen. If you don't have oxygen for a few minutes, you're in trouble.
Right.
So, but what does that oxygen do? It's a source of energy for us. It's kind of like our gasoline in a way. We take in the oxygen, we process that oxygen in the mitochondria in the cells. As a result of that process, energy gets released. That's what keeps us alive. If that process is working well, we have lots of energy and we just don't get sick and we feel great and so forth and so on. If we don't have that energy, depending on how bad it is and a few other circumstances, we're going to get sick. We're going to start falling apart. We're going to be compromised because we don't have an energy. And in essence, we become like a flashlight where the battery's going out. Flashlight could be perfectly good, but it's just not getting the energy. Ozone, because it's oxygen itself, stimulates that energetic process in the mitochondria and causes the mitochondria to work more efficient.
I think that's such an important point. When I went to your course, I believe it was June of 2021, I bought your DVD package, which is really phenomenal because it's such a it's really a compendium of overall health. Is my takeaway, and you made the point that there's really no condition that ozone would not be indicated in, because what we're trying to do is upregulate metabolism as well, and I mean, that's inherent in mitochondrial function. But I think one of the things that you do, which is very, very impressive, is your bioenergy or bioenergetic testing, which you did for me. And I found it extremely valuable, not only from understanding where I was at that point in time from a metabolic standpoint, but how to exercise more appropriately to get the benefits. Do you want to talk a little bit about that? Because I think, people now in certainly in the biohacking world and in health optimization are very interested in mitochondrial function. That's the essence of everything, really. And, I think your testing is huge for that.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought that up. And you just sort of said it in a way, because you said it's the essence. The mitochondrial function is the essence of everything. So the production of energy in the mitochondria really is that's the bottom line for health. If you, again, back to the flashlight, you don't have a battery. I don't care how good that flashlight is. It doesn't matter.
Right.
It's up to the battery is the limiting feature. And that's the way it is with human beings. And sure enough, through bad eating habits, through pollution, through toxicity, through drugs, through injuries, through stress, whatever, sure enough, we screw our mitochondria up. And we screw our mitochondria up. We produce less energy, and then we start becoming vulnerable to getting sick, and diseases are developing. So the idea is we don't want to do that. And you hear this all the time. There's conferences all over the world about how important it is to upregulate the mitochondria. But your point is so well taken, because while all the experts are talking about how you should upregulate your mitochondria, it's hard to believe, Stephen, but none of them are measuring mitochondrial function.
Right.
So how do you know what you're doing? The analogy is, how do you treat blood pressure if you don't have a blood pressure cuff?
Right.
If you don't have a blood pressure cuff, you don't even know if there's a problem or not. If you don't have a blood pressure cuff, if you did know there was a problem, you don't know if what you're doing is treating the problem correctly. So you have to be able to measure mitochondrial function. I was just looking at a conference called the Bioenergetic Conference that they're putting on someplace next week in one of the states. And I'm going through the whole list of the agenda and everything. And they're all talking about how important mitochondria are, what various things that you can do to improve them, blah, blah, blah. There wasn't one speaker talking about any way to actually measure it. In essence, Stephen, those guys at the seminar have no idea what they're doing. Well, maybe they got a slight idea, but they don't know if what they're doing is actually working. They don't know if they need to do. You came in and you had the test. We measured your mitochondrial function. If I recall, you did quite well. And so what that does to you is that validates to you that all the things that you do to stay healthy and so forth are in fact working for you. But the test could have come out poorly. I've tested lots of doctors who come out really poorly, and they don't know it. If you don't test, you don't even know where you're at. Much less if you test out poorly, and then you go and say, well, okay, I'm going to do this, this, and this, so I get better. You better test out and make sure if what you just did worked. So the testing is absolutely critical.
Yeah, and I think you made a great point too in your when you gave your seminar when I was there, and also in your DVDs, is that your metabolic state is a pretty fragile, temporary situation, and it can be altered very quickly by stress, lack of sleep, myriad things can affect this. It's not just like, okay, I'm going out and I'm running and I'm doing what I'm supposed to do, but these other things come into my life and it can change that metabolic state very quickly, which I think you really pointed out. Before we continue with this great discussion, I just want to take a quick break to acknowledge this week's sponsor. This episode is sponsored by Savant Cellars, providers of boutique Tier 1 reds at a Tier 2 price point. Let's imagine you are spelunking in a cave out in Napa Valley, and you come across some of the juice from Savant Cellars. You may just never want to come out until it's gone. Savant Cellars sources all of their fruit from the really big-name boutique vineyards. That's right, where the elites get their fruit. If we put a vineyard designation on our bottles, we would be contractually forced to sell our wines at 3 to 4 times our current pricing. Yes, full disclosure, I am one of the 3 principals and I'm very proud of our wines. Savant Cellars is the genius of wine. Simply great wines, vintage after vintage, crafted in a Bordeaux style so you can lay them down for years or drink them now. They simply just get better. Use the code SPELUNK15 to get a 15% discount at SavantCellars.com. That is CEVANT Cellars.com. Spelunk15. So let's talk a little bit about some of the different indications, what you like to use ozone for. I know you made the point in your talks that it doesn't really matter what they have. I'm optimizing the human so that the human can deal with it.
It's so fascinating, and I got back from Germany in the early '80s, and I'm just a novice at this, and then here I am some 40 years later, and I'm still amazed by what this stuff does. You'd think I'd get used to it, but I'm not used to it. I can't believe how you can take an individual, and I have a lot of these patients. It's just, I guess, the nature of what things are going for me is I get patients who have seen a multiplicity of doctors, and they're seeing me because they can't find the remedy that they need. They can't get the help they need. Right. And so I get some very difficult patients. And it just astounds me how so often I'm able to turn them around. And if I look at what they had done with them with other doctors compared to what I'm doing, a lot of times the only difference is I'm giving them ozone therapy. I'm just tagging on to what other doctors have done with the ozone therapy. But to kind of get into this so the listeners have a little bit of idea what you can do with ozone, number one, you can treat the body systemically. So we can treat the blood. Right. By treating the blood we infuse that treated blood back into the patient. That blood, of course, goes everywhere, brain, liver, heart, whatever, and it creates its effects systemically. Also, we can use ozone locally. So we can put ozone into a bladder. We can put ozone into an intestine. We can put ozone into a stomach. We can put ozone into any joint, a knee, a shoulder. We can put it into the spine. We can literally put it into cerebral spinal fluid, by the way, in the form of an epidural. We can put it into tissues. It's remarkable in its ability to stimulate the body to heal. So you'll have somebody with a bad knee, for example, and we all know that the body was designed to fix that knee. So why is it bad? Well, it's bad because the part of the body that's supposed to fix the knee just isn't fixing the knee. So what can we do to stimulate that part so it actually fixes the knee? We can inject ozone into the knee. And so there's all these applications. You mentioned you can put it on topically to treat things that are on the skin. I don't do it so much, but you can even use ozone to treat cosmetically, to take wrinkles away and varicose veins. It's astounding, the many, many, many applications of this.
So, we have some patients actually that we share one, and she come in for, infusion therapy, spent some time out there with you last month and part of this month, and, does rectal insufflation, very, very judicious patient. So how is the bioavailability, let's say from a rectal infusion versus, where we take 60 cc's of blood and ozonate it and reinfuse it?
Yes. So the way where you put the ozone and the method in which you put the ozone into the body is going to determine how it's going to work.
Right.
So if I put ozone in a bladder, that's going to have a different effect than if I put ozone in a knee, which is going to have a different effect if I put ozone in the cerebral spinal fluid or if I put it in the blood. So where I put it, how I apply it, you are going to get different effects based upon that. So one of the things I talk about in the book, for example, and at the course is what sort of are the best ways to approach a given problem. Is if you can administer ozone into the rectum in the form of an enema sort of treatment. Is that the best way to treat such and such a condition, or would blood be a better way to treat that condition? So we kind of talk about that. And fortunately, as I mentioned a little bit earlier, there are over 3,000 published clinical studies on the applications of ozone. So we get a lot of help from our other clinicians around the world that have done the work, published what their findings are. So we can go and we can look up the studies and say, the patient has such and such. This doctor used this particular method with the ozone and it worked pretty well. And we can learn more about how to apply it properly.
So you've recently gone into EBU now, and I wanted to hear, because I'm hearing more and more about this technology, and it's catching on in different parts of the country. So, but I think it's very interesting how these technologies progress. So let's go into EBU just a little bit.
So EBU, that's spelled EBOO, stands for extracorporeal. That means outside of the body.
Right.
Blood, ozone, oxygenation. So what you're doing is you're taking blood outside of the body and you're exposing it to ozone and oxygen. And to do that, you put a needle in each arm. Blood comes out of one arm, goes through this device that ozonates it and oxygenates it, then goes back into the other arm. But there's something else that goes on in this device besides what I just mentioned. Because as the blood is traveling through the device and is getting exposed to the ozone and the oxygen, it's also going through a dialysis filter unit, which does, the dialysis unit pulls out toxins. And the whole theory is ozone itself, as it's circulating throughout the blood, and you leave the patient on this for a whole hour. So they're on it for a lot of time. They're getting a lot of ozone. Their whole body's getting infused with ozone. It's releasing toxins. The dialysis filter is catching the toxins. And so it's kind of a combination of effect of getting the detoxification effect of ozone while at the same time, and getting all the other effects of ozone, while at the same time also filtering out the blood. And, I'm convinced, and I'm a newbie at this, Stephen, but I'm convinced that dialysis cartridge is pretty key to this operation. There's a number of dialysis cartridges out there. You have to get the right one. If you get one of the cartridges that are not specifically designed to work in this kind of a procedure, you could actually have a negative effect, but you definitely would not get the positive effects we're seeing with a lot of people that are doing this.
Now, what about EBU from Herxheimer reactions? Do you think that will maybe, because I've had a couple of those in some of our early patients when we started ozonating them, and it wasn't necessarily it's a bad thing for the patient to experience, but it means that, you're getting after something and you're getting these exotoxins. So do you think that the EBU technology with that dialysis filtration will minimize that?
Yeah, I have to think that, because you're putting the ozone in, you're getting the hertz because it's releasing some sort of toxin that's overwhelming the body.
Right.
And in the training that I've received with the EBU, the protocols that I'm using, we've never seen anything like that. We haven't seen anything bad, but we're keeping the dose concentration of the ozone relatively low. It's all the way down at a 7 gamma, so it's not a very high concentration.
Right.
And using the special filter, and so we haven't seen anything like that.
Interesting. How do you think you're going to shift your paradigm now that you have that technology? Will you be using less of the, MAH method, or have you given that any thought?
Yeah, so much of this is monetary,
Right.
and these things are not covered by insurance.
Right.
So that I have to work. I have to work with that. My patients come in to see me. They're not necessarily blessed with unlimited funds. In fact, a lot of them, that's a problem for them. So we have to look at that. But leaving it aside, if that wasn't an issue, I'd probably just go with this EBU all the time.
Okay. So you're just saying now that EBU's come along, it's like the Ferrari. Why are we going to still drive the VW?
Similar to that, yeah. Now, keeping in mind, by the way, you've got to have very good veins. You've got to have good veins on both arms. Now, not everybody has that, so that's going to be a limitation too. So it's not like we can get rid of everything else we're doing. But I'm pretty amazed by what I'm seeing with this kind of procedure.
It's real interesting. And so you're only keeping them circulating for about an hour?
That's about it. Yeah, and they don't really want you doing the people that make this have been doing it for a long time. I want to say 10 years.
Right.
So they do have a lot of experience, and they've gone through the trials and errors of making mistakes and doing this and that. And so I pretty much do what I'm told. And I'm not trying to be a cowboy and try anything different. And we're getting great results. I'm just leaving it at that.
Awesome. So I think, you've given a great summary of ozone, its benefits, implementation. How can they get in touch with you, or how can they certainly find out about your next courses that are coming up? Because I think it's something that will be very interesting to a lot of folks.
Well, okay. So if you're a practitioner, or if or if your doctor or your practitioner doesn't use ozone, you might talk to them about getting trained, because whatever they're doing, whether they're an acupuncturist or cardiologist, doesn't matter. They're going to do a lot better if they add ozone into what they're doing. And so to learn about the courses, you go to Shallenberger Ozone Course, ShallenbergerOzoneCourse.com, and that'll give you the whole detail on that. If you just want to learn more, there's lots of stuff on YouTube. You can get my book, The Ozone Miracle. That's a nice, concise little book that gets into a lot of the science, but gets into it in a way that any lay person can really understand and get a grip and have a concept about how it is this stuff works. So many perhaps miracles. And if you're interested at all, you can learn a little bit more on my website, which is antiagingmedicine.com.
I don't know.
There you go.
I won't focus. I'm not good enough on the technology. Oh, wait. Maybe we got something.
We
did it.
There you go.
It's a great book, because like you say, it's really easy to read. I've actually handed these out to patients that we're going to put on a course of therapy, because it just, like you say, it's so easy for them to read. And then once they read that, they're even more committed to that treatment that so it solidifies that. So we have a few of them in the office, and if anybody has questions, then, I direct them to your book, because it is very concise, and it's written in a manner where everybody can, understand it and get that. Now, your last course, I think, was in Denver, right? Well, your next course is going to be where? Back in Nevada?
Well, so we have two things going on. One is there's an academy, and it's the American Academy of Ozone Therapy.
Okay.
And that's an academy full of practitioners who are certified in ozone therapy, and we all share this very special interest. So we meet once a year to kind of go over all the latest stuff and share information and so forth and so on. So the academy meeting was in Denver, and next year it's going to be in Dallas. For people that are interested in perhaps attending that meeting, it's a great meeting. We have a wonderful time, and we learn a lot of great stuff. It's a very evolving field, but you can go to the Academy website, which is AAOT.US, American Academy Ozone Therapy, AAOT.US, and you can see about the meetings. Next one's going to be in Dallas, I believe in June sometime next year.
Okay.
Then there's the trainings. I do all the trainings in Reno.
Okay. Now that's
you go to ShallenbergerOzoneCourse.com and it'll teach you about that.
Right. And Frank, I'll put all this in the show notes so that they'll be able to click on it and get a hyperlink to everything.
Great.
So we make it very user friendly. And anything else you want to add before I let you get back to your vacation?
Well, I just want to say, hey, thanks, man, and I so appreciate you guys that are doing these podcasts. I mean, that's a lot. I think that's a lot of work, and that's a commitment. And it's great to get this kind of information out because, I mean, the information's there, but if people don't hear it and don't know about it,
right,
they're not going to be able to take advantage of it. So I appreciate what you're doing. I appreciate you having me on. And anytime you want to get me back here, talk more about ozone or maybe about the bioenergy testing, I'm all into it. As you know, that's my mission in life is to try and make people healthier.
Well, I do want to talk to you about the bioenergetic testing because I think we need to start getting that implemented, back in Georgia. And so I'll reach out to you. But I want to just thank you again, not only for taking the time this morning to jump on this, because I think what you have is it's just huge from an importance factor, but all the work that you've done and, you've blazed a lot of trails and that's not always easy. And so thanks for all the work that you've done and really appreciate it.
Okay. So welcome.
All right. Have a great vacation. I'll talk to you later.
Okay, Stephen. Nice to talk to you.
All right. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
I hope you all enjoyed today's show and got some truly empowering knowledge out of it. You can always follow up on anything we talked about in the show notes found at our website, podofinquiry.com. If you think you might have tickled just a few neurons inside that cerebral cortex, please spread the word to your friends and colleagues and tell them that they need to get spelunking. Also, if you can take a minute to leave a review on your podcast provider of choice, and especially Apple Podcasts, that would greatly help the show and be so appreciated, provided it's positive. And if not, then just keep your pie hole shut and stay down in that cave. Let's keep spelunking.
This podcast is designed for informational purposes only and does not constitute any medical or surgical consulting advice or imply a development of any physician-patient relationship. The opinions of guests who are featured on the show are not necessarily the opinions of Dr. Barrett or the production team. This podcast is owned solely by Barrett Medical and Surgical Media, LLC. While the show is highly oriented for physicians and healthcare providers, anyone interested in the improvement of human performance and understanding will find us a welcome goblet to sip from, or guzzle. However, no representation or warranties are made in any way whatsoever on this podcast for any products, techniques, or other things discussed. Invited guests are not vetted by the Pod of Inquiry for their qualifications and may have a direct or indirect financial interest in what they present and discuss on the show. The Pod of Inquiry disclaims any responsibility from anything taken from the show and used personally or professionally. It is a responsibility of the listener to perform their own due diligence prior to the implementation of any ideas, products, techniques, or anything talked about on the show.